Please pray with me a moment. Holy One, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be acceptable to you, O God, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. As I was preparing for church this week, I was thinking about our theme of hope. And I was open for a story to go along with the sermon that I wrote. And what happened this morning is something that doesn't happen often, but I was given a story and I was also given a whole new sermon. So here we are. We're going to experience this together, but let me share the story. I think I've told this story to you before, but it's particularly meaningful to me today. It's about my mother, and my mother's birthday is December 1st, something that you have in common with my mom, along with your great big heart and your smiling face. So, I just want to talk about what hope looks like. Now, we lived in Banff, right? And my one brother and his family, and my sister and her husband and their family, they lived in Calgary. So that's about an hour and a half drive, depending on the roads between. And especially at Christmas time, one could never be sure if that road was going to be safe to travel, right? So, but my mom was all about the anticipation, right? Like a lot of moms, a lot of grandmas, she would start preparing to welcome people into the house, to welcome them. And that went on for weeks, essentially, as goodies got hidden away in the freezer, where you know that Christmas goodies are sometimes better frozen. Just a thought. I wonder how I knew that, right? And she would just prepare, and she would sing, right? The closer it got to Christmas, the more she would sing. Now, she always was a singer, and it wasn't unusual for her to break into song. But the closer it got to the day that she was anticipating the arrival of my siblings and their children, the more enthusiasm and excitement filled in her song. And then on the day, well, the night before, I'm pretty sure she would pray and hope that God would not snow all over the roads. And the next morning, she'd get up and she'd rush to the window and she'd say, "Hallelujah, it didn't snow." And then the watch would begin. And she'd be busy getting ready for stuff, but she'd go to a window. And then she'd be doing something else, and she'd go to another window. And then she'd be doing something else, and she'd go to another window. And eventually, she knew that one of those trips to the window was going to reveal the arrival of one of her families. And I knew, no matter where I was in a very large house, I knew when they'd arrive because she would squeal like an excited little girl on Christmas morning. She would squeal, "They're here! They're here! They're here! They're here! They're here!" And she would go rushing out, sometimes forgetting to put anything on besides her slippers, to go and greet these people that she was so excited to have there for Christmas. Now for me, that's what hope looks like. You know, hope looks like anticipation. Hope looks like excitement. Hope looks like all of those things. And probably for you, hope looks like a lot of other stuff. But that's my hope. So as we go into this week, or we go further into this week, we're studying hope. And this is actually the last sermon in a sermon series called The Prodigal God. And you might think, why would you end a series on the first day of a new season? Well, it's because they fit. They fit together. And I want to talk to you about the hope we see in that story, okay? You think about the son, the youngest son who's gone off. He's taken his share of the inheritance. He's spent it all doing all kinds of stuff. There's no shortage of description in the parable. And he's now run out of money. And he is in a position where there is nothing for him. And he is feeding pigs in a faraway country. And then what happens is he gets an idea. But along with the idea comes what? So along with the idea comes comes hope. Hope that should he return home, not as a member of the family, but just with the willingness to be a hired hand in his family, he could hope that his father would allow him to return as a hired hand. So he had hope. And that hope propelled him on this journey that he took, right? Home. Now, it's interesting that the sermon series is actually called The Prodigal God, because we haven't actually explored that a whole lot. But I want to remind you that prodigal means extravagant and wasteful, right? And so just hold that in your mind. The father must have had hope. You know why? You know why I say the father must have had hope? Because he saw his son when he was yet a long way off. Why do you think he was looking a long way down the road? Hope. He had, one more time, he had hope. Yes, he had hope. He must have nurtured that hope in his heart from the moment his son left, that someday he would return. And this day, he looked out and he saw his son, and he went running out and he threw his arms around him and welcomed him. Hope. And another place we see hope in the story is we see hope in the father as he goes out to talk to his very cranky older son, who's standing outside of the party that has been given for the return of his brother. And the father must have had hope that if he went out and pled with his older son, that son would come home. So that are some examples of hope in the story of the prodigal son. That kind of hope that we experience in the Father might seem to some as extravagant and wasteful. Because what if the son hadn't come home? He would have been disappointed. What if? But the bottom line is, that is the kind of hope God has. That extravagant hope that doesn't care, just longs, just anticipates, just waits in excitement. That's the kind of hope he has. Jesus, then, was an expression of that hope. People had begun to limit God in their faith. They had begun to limit their ability to approach God with these rules of cleanliness and uncleanliness. There had just been this shift, and I think God saw more and more of his people being led away and misdirected and far from home. And the hope of a father's heart could not leave them there. And the love of a father's heart could not leave them there. And so he sent his son. And remember last week, we talked about Jesus as the true elder son, who, knowing the heart of his father and the hope that his father had to bring all of his children home, that Jesus leapt out of heaven to come and live with us as a baby, to grow with us, to walk with us, and as a man to teach us, to guide us, and eventually to die for us and rise again to give us hope. Right? So Jesus came that we might be forgiven. Now, forgiveness is one of those things that can be kind of complicated, and I think I know I've done a whole sermon on it at some point, and I can do it again. But what I want to remind you is that one understanding of forgiveness, or being forgiven, is to have our minds changed. So in order to forgive, we have to see ourselves differently. In order to forgive, we have to see the other person differently. In order to forgive, we have to see God differently. And I've said before that Jesus came into the world not to change God's mind about us, which is the understanding of forgiveness we often work with, but to change our minds about God. Because God hoped for the restoral of his people, the restoration of his people. So, the younger son, right, could imagine with hope that he would have a place in his father's home when he returned home as a hired hand. Not as a child, he'd given that up. But what happened? The father was watching and he saw him coming and he ran out to greet him and he fell on his neck and he forgave him. But in order for that to happen, in order for the son to be forgiven, he had to receive him. What if he had held so tightly to his plan and said, no, it's good that you want me to be your son again, but no, this is the plan. He would have missed the forgiveness. The forgiveness was there. It was standing right in front of him. It had its arms wrapped around his neck, but he would have missed it. Sound familiar? Sometimes our plans are more important than what God offers us. But the Father was ready and waiting to forgive. Jesus came to change our minds about God, not to change God's mind about us. And just like it was hope that drove the Father out into the garden during the middle of this feast to go and talk to his eldest son, it would have required an acceptance of the Father's forgiving that would have brought the elder son home. And we actually never know if he came. So I want you to stop for a minute and go back to that image of my wonderful, crazy, delightful mom racing from window to window to window watching. God is watching at the window for all of us to come home. And Jesus leapt out of heaven to bring us home. To change our minds about God, to change our minds about ourselves, to help us to know, are you ready? We're doing a point thing. To help us to know that no matter what, we are forgiven. Whoa, let's do it one more time. That was good. That was really good. No matter what, we are forgiven. Yep. That means God can change your mind because God's mind doesn't need to be changed. We are forgiven. So, when the younger son returned home, right, with his plan that he was going to just be a hired man, the first thing that the Father did was what? Welcomed him into the family. He said, you are my son. Bring the robe. Bring the ring. You are my son. You've always been my son. You always will be my son. You are my son. And when the elder brother, remember we talked last week about Jesus as the true elder brother. In that parable, the elder brother, the people who were originally listening to it would have expected the elder brother to be the one to go and find his brother. But he didn't. But our elder brother, the true elder brother, came, leapt out of heaven. I love that image. Leapt out of heaven to come and find us. Because he knew the heart of the Father was that none should be lost, none should be separate, and that we all should be family. I'm so glad I'm a part of the family of God. We are family. You're not alone anymore. Even if this were your first Sunday here, you're family. You're family with us. You're family with Christians around the world. You're family with Jesus. It says in the Bible that we have been made children of God. We are family. So God's hope helps us be, and that means we are family. I'm practicing so that sometime I can do a service like this for the kids. Anyway, remember when the younger son came home after he'd been welcomed? What did the father do? He called for a feast. Kill the fatted calf, put it on to cook, call the neighbors, get everybody in here. My son was lost. He has been found. My son was dead. He is alive. We must celebrate. And to celebrate, what do? We feast, right? We talked about that when we were talking about the celebration. Remember, I had you all think for a minute about what the first thing we do as we get ready for a big family gathering. And it was all about food, right? So, the feast. Celebrations involve food. When we sit at the table with those that we love, we are fed, body, minds, and spirit. We are home in a way that we can't be home any other time. Surrounded by those we either were born, the families we were either born into or chose. We are home. And the feast in this is a talk about the forever feast, which is coming. And we're going to talk about that. But Isaiah 25 talked about it, you know? The best food, the best wine, the best meal, the best company, no more death, no more tears, no more brokenness. That's a feast. Okay? That's a feast. So, as we come to the table, the communion table, this is our feast. So the communion table is our feast. And it's a feast where there are no boundaries. Everyone's welcome. And we just have to have our minds changed about whether we will participate or not. But we are invited to the feast. We have to decide if we will be the younger brother and allow our father to embrace us, or whether we'll be the older brother and stand out grumpy in the garden. So, God wants us to come to the feast. Right. And we're going to be talking more about the forever feast. And that's not an unusual idea, right? That's not an unusual idea. That's kind of all of the prophecies about God's kingdom coming are all kind of our foundation for the heaven images that we have, right? All will be healed, the earth will be restored, there will be no war, there will be no fighting, all that kind of thing. No brokenness, no blindness, right? But the problem with that, for us, is that if we live totally thinking about then, we forget how to live for now. And every morning we have to do what? We have to get up and get ready to live for now. We have a day in front of us. We have a moment in front of us. We have a breath to take. We have places to go and people to see. But the thing is, we are supposed to carry with us through our day the hope of God's forgiveness that made us family and brought us to the feast. What would our lives look like if we actually held on to that every day? We would be joyful. We would be excited. We would be exuberant, and we wouldn't be able to shut up about it, would we? Right? What is the most common question we ask each other right now as we're looking forward to Christmas? What are your plans? Right? What are your plans for Christmas? And people tell us. Either they're staying home because for them a quiet celebration is exactly the thing, or they're gathering with family, or whatever they're doing. Some of them are going somewhere sunny, right? Whatever they're doing, that's how we live our hope for now. And we have this hope of God's forgiveness that makes us family and brings us into the feast, and that's what we're supposed to carry with us. So all of the family celebrations that you're planning or that you're going to, all of that is how we live this for now. How we live that through each day. And that's the joy and the anticipation that is supposed to inspire us for now. Because, finally, in the end, God's going to do the things that God's promised to do. God promised us a Savior, and our elder brother leapt out of heaven to come and be with us. But God's also promised that the brokenness would end, sickness would be no more, people would live in whole and healed bodies, that the earth would be restored, that heaven would come to us right here. And part of our for now is that we're supposed to be asking, how do I make that happen today? So the great feast will be a time when all is restored. And we live today knowing that God will do this. Now everybody, every single one of us, has a different image of what those promises look like. That's fine. Your image had better be inspiring some excitement and joy. And if it's not, you need to rethink it. Because all of the images that we're given of God's kingdom are images of joy and wholeness and hope. And those are the things that help us get through grief. And those are the things that help us get through loss. And those are the things that help us get through illness and all of the things we face that are difficult. That joy helps us to do that in this life as we wait for the next. We are part of this. We receive it. Hope, forgiveness, family. Right? Forgiveness, family. Did I miss one? Food, feast. We receive this today, but our eyes are on the prize as well. So we as people live in this place between, louder, between, and finally. Finally should be said like, hallelujah! What are we waiting for? Finally! What are you waiting for? Finally. Oh. Hallelujah! What are you waiting for? Finally. Yeah. It's done. We're not separate. We don't have to work for it. We don't have to fight for it. We don't have to question it. We will be swept up in God's love and welcomed into that feast. That's the point. This is where we live. And on Sundays, one Sunday a month, we gather at this table to be reminded that that's what the feast is all about. So, at this point, I'm going to ask someone to go and let the Sunday school kids know that it's time to come back in. And I have a video for you to watch. Kathy Scott.